The suitcase was moving, and Daniel Whitmore almost drove away. The late afternoon sun hung low over the city dump just outside Columbus, Ohio, casting long amber streaks across mountains of discarded furniture and rusted appliances. Daniel's black Range Rover idled on loose gravel as the scent of motor oil and damp cardboard drifted through the cracked window. He had come to get rid of a few things: old leather chairs from his downtown office, a cracked marble side table, remnants of a life he was quietly upgrading. At 46, worth more than most people in the county combined, Daniel Whitmore was a man accustomed to replacing what no longer served him. His tailored coat rested perfectly against his broad shoulders as he stepped out, Italian shoes sinking slightly into the grit. A landfill worker nodded from 50 yards away, uninterested. Daniel opened the rear hatch and signaled for assistance unloading the items. That's when he saw it. About 20 feet from his SUV, half-shadowed behind a heap of broken picture frames, sat an old navy blue suitcase. Scuffed, outdated, out of place even in a dump. It shifted, just barely. Daniel froze, keys still in hand. The wind wasn't strong enough to move something that size. He waited, telling himself it was a trick of light, maybe a raccoon pressing from inside. But then it moved again, subtle, deliberate. His chest tightened in a way quarterly earnings reports never managed to do. For a long moment he considered turning back to his car, letting the landfill staff handle it. This wasn't his problem. Nothing here was. And yet something about the smallness of the movement unsettled him. Slowly, against his own instinct for distance, Daniel Whitmore stepped toward the suitcase. Gravel crunched beneath Daniel Whitmore's shoes as he closed the distance, each step slower than the last, as if the air itself had thickened around him. The suitcase twitched again, a faint scrape from inside, not frantic, not loud, but intentional. His pulse began to thud in his ears, steady and unfamiliar. Daniel had negotiated multi-million-dollar mergers without blinking, had stood before rooms of investors who dissected every word he spoke. Yet this small, ordinary object unsettled him in a way he could not explain. He stopped 3 feet away. The navy fabric was faded, one corner torn, the zipper slightly misaligned. A baggage tag dangled from the handle, the ink too smudged to read. He scanned the horizon of the landfill. A bulldozer groaned somewhere in the distance. Seagulls circled overhead. No one seemed to notice. He told himself it was likely an animal seeking warmth. He told himself the responsible thing was to alert a worker. But something held him there. Another sound came from inside, softer this time, almost like a breath catching. Daniel felt a tightening in his chest, a memory stirring from years he rarely allowed himself to revisit. He crouched slowly, the knees of his tailored trousers brushing against dust. For a moment he simply stared at the zipper, his reflection faintly visible in the dull metal pull tab. This was not his world. He built glass towers and signed contracts. He did not kneel beside abandoned luggage at a city dump. Yet his hand moved forward anyway. His fingers hovered over the zipper, hesitating inches away, as if crossing that final space would change something permanent inside him. Daniel Whitmore wrapped his fingers around the cold metal pull tab and paused, his breath shallow, the late afternoon wind brushing against the back of his neck like a warning he could not quite interpret. The suitcase shifted again beneath his hand, not violently, not chaotically, but with the small, confined movement of something alive, adjusting within tight space. His throat tightened. He had spent most of his adult life controlling outcomes, anticipating risks, eliminating uncertainty before it had a chance to grow teeth. This was different. There was no spreadsheet for this moment, no assistant to delegate to, no contract clause to shield him. Another faint sound slipped through the fabric, softer than the hum of the distant bulldozer, almost fragile. It was not the sound of claws. It was not the restless scramble of an animal. It was rhythmic, uneven, like breathing filtered through fabric and fear. Daniel swallowed hard and glanced once more across the landfill, half expecting someone to shout that it was a prank, that he should step away. No one did. The world continued moving in slow indifference. Carefully, deliberately, he pulled the zipper an inch. The metallic teeth separated with a rough scrape that seemed too loud for the quiet surrounding him. He froze, listening. Silence followed, thick and suspended. Then from inside the narrow opening came the faintest whisper of air, followed by something that sounded almost like a small, trembling sigh. Daniel felt his pulse spike. He knew in that instant that whatever was inside was not debris, not trash, not something meant to be discarded. His hand tightened, and with a controlled but urgent motion, he began to draw the zipper farther open. The zipper slid open another 6 inches, the coarse sound tearing through the stillness, as Daniel Whitmore folded back the worn fabric lid with careful, trembling control. What he saw stole the air from his lungs. Curled tightly inside the cramped interior, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around her shins, was a little girl no older than 7. Her pale blonde hair clung in soft tangles around her face, and her small frame fit the narrow suitcase with heartbreaking precision, as if she had learned how to make herself smaller than the world allowed. For a split second, Daniel could not move. The late sun cast a thin line of gold across her cheek, illuminating closed eyelids that fluttered against the sudden light. She was breathing, shallow but steady. Relief and shock collided inside him so violently that he had to brace one hand against the gravel to steady himself. He had expected anything but this. A stray animal, a discarded object shifting under debris. Not a child. Not someone so small and silent in a place meant for what people no longer wanted. He swallowed hard and leaned closer, lowering his voice instinctively, as though loud words might shatter something fragile. The girl stirred at the movement of air, her lashes lifting slowly. Large blue eyes met his unfocused at first, then sharpening with cautious awareness. There was no scream, no sudden motion, only watchfulness. Daniel felt an unfamiliar crack form inside his carefully constructed composure. He loosened his coat and gently folded the suitcase lid farther back to give her space, careful not to touch her without permission. The distant machinery continued its low rumble, indifferent to the gravity of what had just been revealed. Daniel's voice came out quieter than he expected. He asked if she could hear him. The little girl blinked once, then twice, as if deciding whether this man in polished shoes was real or just another passing shadow. Daniel kept his voice low and steady the way he once had, when calming anxious investors before a risky launch. But this was different, infinitely more delicate. He asked her name, careful to leave space between his words so they would not feel like pressure. The little girl's lips parted slightly dry and pale, and for a moment he thought she might not answer. Her gaze studied his face as if measuring something invisible, weighing trust against instinct. Finally, in a voice so soft it almost dissolved into the hum of distant machinery, she said, "Lily." The name seemed too gentle for a place like this. Daniel repeated it quietly, anchoring it in the air between them. He told her his name was Daniel. He told her she was safe. The words felt strange on his tongue because safety was something he usually associated with security systems and gated properties, not with kneeling in gravel beside a discarded suitcase. Lily shifted slightly, wincing at the stiffness in her cramped legs. Daniel immediately eased back, giving her room. He noticed the faint outline of small sneakers pressed against the fabric interior, the careful way she had folded herself to fit. There were no dramatic tears, no frantic movement, just a child conserving energy in a world that had not been gentle. Daniel removed his coat and laid it across the edge of the suitcase to block the glare of the sun. He asked if she was hurt. She shook her head once, slowly. He asked if she was alone. A pause followed, longer this time, her fingers tightening slightly around her sleeves. The landfill worker in the distance laughed at something unheard, the sound jarringly normal. Daniel felt a sharp awareness settle over him. This moment required more than curiosity. It required decision. Lily's eyes remained fixed on him, not pleading, not accusing, simply waiting to see what kind of man he would be. Daniel felt the weight of her silence settle into his chest like a stone. He understood waiting. He had built an empire on calculated pauses, on knowing when to speak and when to let the other side reveal themselves. But this was not negotiation. This was a child inside a suitcase at a city dump, looking at him as though the next 30 seconds would define her understanding of the world. He shifted carefully, lowering himself fully to one knee, so he was not towering over her. Gravel pressed through the fabric of his trousers, but he did not move. He asked Lily if she could uncurl her legs slowly, if she felt able to sit up. She hesitated, then nodded once. With careful effort, she began to stretch movements, stiff and deliberate. Daniel kept his hands, visible palms open, making sure she saw that he would not force anything. The late afternoon light softened, casting a warmer glow across the landfill as the sun dipped closer to the horizon. A breeze carried the faint scent of cut grass from somewhere beyond the property line, an almost cruel reminder that normal neighborhoods existed just a few miles away. Lily pushed herself upright inside the suitcase, small hands gripping the edge for balance. She looked smaller sitting up than she had curled inside, as though folding herself had made her stronger. Daniel noticed a thin layer of dust along the outside of the case, suggesting it had not been there long. His mind raced with questions he forced himself not to unleash all at once. He asked her if someone had brought her here. Her gaze dropped briefly to her sneakers, then back to him. She did not answer, but the pause said enough. Daniel felt a tightening behind his ribs, a protective instinct rising so suddenly it startled him. He stood slowly and extended his hand, not touching her, just offering it. He told her he was going to help her out of there. For the first time since he had approached, Lily's fingers moved toward his. Lily's fingers hovered inches from his palm before finally resting against it, light and tentative, as if testing whether he was solid. Daniel closed his hand gently around hers, careful not to grip too tightly, and felt how small her bones were beneath his skin. Slowly, steadily, he helped her lift one foot over the edge of the suitcase, then the other supporting her weight as she stepped onto the uneven gravel. She swayed slightly, and his free hand instinctively moved to steady her shoulder, stopping just short until she gave a faint nod of permission. When she stood fully upright, she barely reached the middle of his chest. The suitcase lay open behind her, an empty shell, now its dark interior exposed to the fading light. Daniel removed his coat from the edge and draped it carefully around Lily's shoulders. The fabric swallowed her frame, the sleeves hanging past her hands. She did not protest. She simply wrapped the coat tighter, as though it were something she had been missing for a long time. Daniel crouched again to meet her eye level. He asked if she felt dizzy. She shook her head. He asked if she had eaten. A small pause, then another shake. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in focus. He scanned the landfill once more, this time not as a businessman disposing of excess, but as someone searching for signs. No car idling nearby. No frantic adult calling a name. Only the distant machinery and the indifferent sky. He realized how close this had been to being overlooked. 5 more minutes, and a bulldozer could have pushed that suitcase into a mound of debris without a second thought. The realization sent a cold wave through him. He asked Lily how long she had been inside. She looked at the sun, then back at him and whispered, "Since it was brighter." Daniel followed her gaze to the horizon, calculating silently. Hours. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself. This was no longer hesitation. This was action. He told her they were leaving this place now. Daniel rose to his full height, but did not release Lily's hand. The decision formed inside him with a clarity he had not felt in years. He could not simply drive away and make a phone call from a comfortable distance. He could not pass responsibility to someone else and return to climate-controlled normalcy. He told her they were going to his vehicle, that it was warm and safe, and that he would stay right beside her. Lily glanced once at the open suitcase behind them, then back at him, as if memorizing the moment she stepped away from it. Daniel led her slowly across the uneven ground, adjusting his pace to her shorter stride. Each small crunch of gravel sounded louder now, purposeful. As they approached the black Range Rover, he noticed how out of place it looked against the backdrop of rusted metal and broken wood. He opened the passenger door and helped her climb into the wide leather seat, lifting her carefully so she did not have to strain. The interior lights glowed softly, illuminating her small face beneath the oversized coat. She sat stiffly at first, hands folded in her lap, eyes scanning the dashboard as if entering another world entirely. Daniel closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's side, his movements controlled but urgent. Once inside, he started the engine, and the steady hum filled the cabin with a sense of enclosure. He turned the heat on low, not too strong, watching as Lily's shoulders eased by a fraction. He offered her a bottle of water from the center console, unscrewing the cap before handing it to her. She accepted it with both hands and took careful, measured sips. Daniel kept his voice calm as he asked if she knew her last name. She hesitated longer this time. The silence stretched between them, heavier than before. Finally, she whispered, "Harper." Daniel repeated it quietly, anchoring that too. Lily Harper. A name. An identity. Not something meant to be left behind. He shifted the car into drive, but before pressing the gas, he paused. This was the moment where he chose what came next. Daniel kept his foot hovering above the accelerator, the engine humming beneath them like a quiet reminder that motion was possible. The landfill gate stood about 100 yards ahead. Beyond it, a 2-lane road that would lead back toward Columbus, toward hospitals, toward police stations, toward systems designed to handle situations like this. His mind moved quickly through options, calculating outcomes the way he always did. Call emergency services immediately. Drive straight to the nearest hospital, which he knew was 12 minutes away. Notify authorities and step aside. That would be the expected response. Responsible. Clean. He glanced at Lily Harper in the passenger seat. She held the water bottle with both hands, taking small, deliberate sips, as though afraid it might disappear. Her eyes were no longer scanning the interior. They were fixed on him. Not with fear exactly, with evaluation. As if she understood that whatever he chose next would determine whether the world was safe or unpredictable. Daniel felt a sharp awareness that he could not treat this as a transaction. He reached for his phone, then stopped. He realized he did not yet know the full story. He did not know if someone was searching for her. He did not know whether involving authorities immediately would frighten her further. He softened his voice and asked where her mother was. Lily's fingers tightened around the bottle. A long pause followed, heavy and fragile. Finally, she said, barely above a whisper, that her mother had told her to stay quiet. Daniel felt something shift inside him. He asked if her mother knew she was here. Lily's gaze dropped to her lap. After several seconds, she shook her head. The landfill gate began to close slowly in his rearview mirror as another truck exited. Time was moving whether he was ready or not. He knew enough to understand this was no accident, no simple misunderstanding. A child had been placed somewhere no child should ever be. He exhaled slowly and made his decision. He shifted the vehicle fully into drive and rolled toward the gate, already planning the route in his head. He would take her somewhere safe first, somewhere calm. Then he would make the call. As the tires crossed from gravel to pavement, Lily spoke again so quietly he almost missed it. She said she thought nobody was coming back. The words settled heavily inside the vehicle, quieter than the engine, yet louder than anything Daniel had heard all day. He kept his eyes on the road as the city landfill disappeared in the rearview mirror, replaced by open stretches of Ohio highway, lined with early autumn trees. He asked Lily gently why she thought nobody was coming back. She traced a small circle on the leather seat with her fingertip, thinking carefully before answering. She said her mother had been crying earlier. She said her mother had hugged her longer than usual. Daniel's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. He knew that kind of hug, the kind that feels like goodbye even if the word is never spoken. He asked if anyone else was with them when they arrived. Lily shook her head. She said they rode in a car she did not recognize, and that her mother told her it was a game that she needed to stay very still and very quiet. Daniel felt a familiar tension rising in his chest, the same pressure he used to feel as a boy when adults spoke in half-truths around him, assuming he would not notice. He kept his tone steady and asked if her mother said where she was going. Lily whispered that she said she had to fix something, that she would be right back. The phrase echoed in Daniel's mind with painful clarity. He had heard those same words from his own father decades ago, spoken casually, before long stretches of absence that eventually became permanent. He had built his life around never depending on promises like that again. The highway sign for downtown Columbus appeared ahead, green and reflective in the fading light. Daniel made a slow decision and took the exit toward a private urgent care facility he financially supported, one that would not overwhelm Lily with flashing lights or crowded waiting rooms. He glanced at her again. She was watching the passing streetlights, now her reflection faint in the window. He asked her one more question, careful and direct. He asked if she wanted him to stay. There was no hesitation this time. Lily nodded once, small and certain. Daniel felt something irreversible shift inside him. Whatever this situation turned out to be, whatever explanations waited ahead, he understood one thing with absolute clarity. He would not be someone who drove away. The urgent care building stood 3 miles off the highway, a modern structure of glass and brushed steel that Daniel had helped fund 5 years earlier as part of a community initiative. He had attended the ribbon cutting, smiled for photographs, and left before sunset. Tonight, the illuminated sign felt different, less like a charitable investment, and more like a lifeline. He parked close to the entrance and turned off the engine, the sudden quiet filling the space between him and Lily. He reassured her that they were simply going inside to make sure she was healthy. He promised he would remain with her the entire time. She searched his face for a long second, then nodded. Daniel stepped out, walked around, and opened her door. He lifted her gently, feeling how light she was in his arms, and carried her through the sliding glass doors. The receptionist looked up with professional calm, but her expression shifted when she saw the oversized coat draped around the small girl. Daniel spoke clearly and evenly. He explained that he had found Lily alone and that she needed to be checked immediately. There was no drama in his tone, only urgency wrapped in composure. Within minutes, they were escorted to a quiet examination room painted in soft blue. A nurse with kind eyes introduced herself and spoke directly to Lily, not over her. Daniel remained seated beside the exam table, his hand resting loosely within Lily's reach without forcing contact. As the nurse checked her temperature and listened to her breathing, Daniel answered procedural questions, providing his full name, his address, his identification. He felt the weight of the next step pressing against his thoughts. He knew he would have to contact authorities. He knew there would be reports and statements and scrutiny. The part of him that built corporations calculated reputational risk automatically. Headlines, speculation, questions about why he had been there. He silenced that instinct with effort. None of it mattered compared to the child sitting inches away. When the nurse stepped out to retrieve a physician, Lily's fingers quietly found the edge of his sleeve. Daniel looked down. She did not speak, but her grip tightened slightly, as though confirming he was still real. He leaned closer and told her he was not going anywhere. And for the first time in years, Daniel Whitmore realized that staying might cost him something, but leaving would cost far more. The physician entered quietly, introducing himself in a calm, reassuring tone before beginning a careful examination. Daniel remained seated beside Lily, answering when appropriate and stepping back when asked, but never leaving the room. The assessment was thorough, yet gentle, confirming what Daniel had hoped and feared at the same time. She was dehydrated and exhausted, but there were no visible injuries. The doctor recommended fluids, food, and observation, then asked Daniel privately how he had found her. Daniel recounted the events with measured clarity, describing the landfill, the suitcase, the moment he saw it move. Speaking the sequence aloud made it feel surreal, as though he were describing someone else's afternoon. The physician listened without interruption, then explained that protocol required notifying local authorities and Child Protective Services immediately. Daniel nodded. He had known that moment was coming since the tires left the gravel. He stepped into the hallway to make the call himself, preferring control over delay. When he reached the appropriate department, his voice did not waver. He provided his name, his location, and the situation in precise detail. He understood that once the report was filed, the process would unfold beyond his influence. Background checks, interviews, questions about motive. He had nothing to hide, yet he felt the weight of surrendering control. Returning to the examination room, he found Lily sipping apple juice from a small carton, her hands steadier now. She looked up immediately when he entered, searching his face for signs of departure. He reassured her that some people would come to talk and help figure out what happened. He chose his words carefully, avoiding anything that sounded like removal or separation. Lily listened, absorbing more than she appeared to. She asked quietly if they were going to send her somewhere far away. The question struck him harder than he expected. He told her the truth without overpromising. He said that many adults would need to understand her story, but that he would stay through every conversation tonight. Her shoulders lowered slightly at that. Outside the window, evening had fully settled over Columbus streetlights, casting long reflections across the glass. Daniel felt the reality crystallize around him. This was no longer an interruption in his schedule. It was a crossroads. And he knew with certainty that whichever path unfolded next, his life had already shifted. Lily sat on the edge of the examination table, the oversized coat still wrapped around her shoulders like borrowed armor, as two social workers arrived and introduced themselves with careful smiles. Daniel remained seated beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence without being crowded. The questions began gently. What was her full name? How old was she? Did she know her home address? Lily answered in soft, measured fragments, each word sounding like it had to travel a long distance before reaching the air. When they asked about her mother, her small fingers tightened in the fabric of Daniel's sleeve. She said her mother had been tired for a long time. She said her mother cried at night when she thought Lily was asleep. She said sometimes grown-ups had problems that did not fit inside a house. The room fell quiet at that. Daniel felt something fracture inside him. He had spent decades believing that problems could always be solved, with enough resources, enough strategy, enough willpower. Yet here was a child describing a reality where love and exhaustion existed in the same breath. One of the social workers asked Lily why she did not call for help when she was alone. Lily's eyes drifted toward the floor, then back to Daniel. In a voice barely above a whisper, she said she did not want to make things worse. She said her mother told her that sometimes being quiet was the best way to protect people. The simplicity of that sentence hit Daniel harder than any accusation could have. He remembered his own childhood kitchen, the hum of a refrigerator, the tension of unspoken arguments, the way silence had been treated like loyalty. He had built a life that rewarded boldness and punished hesitation, yet he had once been a boy who learned to shrink himself to keep the peace. Lily looked up at him again, and this time there was no uncertainty in her expression. She asked him if he thought her mother was coming back. The question suspended itself in the air, fragile and enormous. Daniel felt the weight of truth pressing against his ribs. He could not promise what he did not know. He could not lie to ease the moment. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so that it felt steady instead of sharp. He told her that sometimes adults get lost in their own storms, but that none of this was her fault. As he spoke those words, he realized he was not only speaking to her, He was speaking to the boy he used to be. Lily listened to his words with a stillness that felt older than her years. The social workers stepped out briefly to coordinate next steps, leaving the room quieter than before. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the space, steady and indifferent. Daniel remained seated beside her, elbows resting lightly on his knees, trying to steady the wave rising inside his chest. Lily studied his face as though she were searching for something beyond reassurance. Then she asked him a question that shifted the air entirely. She asked if he had ever been left somewhere before. The directness of it stunned him. For a moment he considered deflecting, offering a safe adult answer. Instead, he exhaled slowly and nodded once. He told her that when he was young, his father would disappear for days at a time without explanation. He said there were nights he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the door, convinced that if he stayed awake long enough, someone would come back for him. Lily absorbed this quietly. She asked if anyone came back. Daniel held her gaze and admitted that sometimes they did and sometimes they did not. He said the hardest part was not knowing which it would be. The confession felt raw, stripped of the polished armor he wore in boardrooms. Lily shifted slightly closer on the examination table. She said she tried to be very good so that her mother would not be overwhelmed. She said she kept her toys neat and did not ask too many questions. Daniel felt the weight of that small effort press against him. A child reorganizing her existence to make life easier for an adult. He felt anger flicker not at Lily's mother as a person, but at the gravity of circumstances that cornered people into impossible choices. Lily's voice softened further as she said she thought maybe if she stayed quiet long enough, everything would fix itself. The simplicity of the hope nearly unraveled him. Daniel reached out slowly and let his hand rest over hers, not gripping, just present. He told her that being quiet does not fix storms. He told her storms require shelter and sometimes new foundations. His voice faltered for the first time, and he did not hide it. In that small, sterile room, with paperwork waiting and authorities en route, Daniel Whitmore felt something irreversible happen inside him. He no longer saw this as a moment he happened to witness. He saw it as a moment he had been meant to enter. The hallway outside the examination room grew busier as uniformed officers arrived alongside an additional case supervisor, their voices low and procedural, yet respectful. Daniel stood when they entered, instinctively positioning himself slightly between them and Lily, not as a barrier, but as reassurance. He provided his statement again, steady and precise, describing the landfill, the suitcase, the moment he saw it move. Each repetition made the reality more concrete, less like a strange dream, and more like a turning point carved in stone. One officer informed him that they were attempting to locate Lily's mother based on the limited information available. The words attempt and locate echoed in the room with heavy uncertainty. Lily watched the exchange quietly, her small frame wrapped in his coat, eyes moving from face to face as though measuring which adults might disappear next. When the officers stepped aside to confer, she looked up at Daniel and asked the question that fractured whatever distance he had left. She asked if she was too heavy to carry anymore. For a split second, he did not understand. Then it landed. In her mind, being left somewhere meant she had become weight, unmanageable, inconvenient. Daniel felt his throat tighten so sharply he had to look away to steady himself. He crouched down until they were eye level, his voice firm despite the emotion pressing behind it. He told her she was not heavy. He told her that sometimes life becomes heavy for adults, but children are never the burden. His composure cracked on the final word, not dramatically, but honestly. Lily studied him carefully, as though evaluating the truth of that statement. Then she said something that silenced the entire room without raising her voice. She said she tried to fold herself small so she would not take up too much space. The image of her inside that suitcase flooded back into his mind with unbearable clarity. The precision of her curled body, the deliberate stillness. Daniel felt something inside him collapse and rebuild in the same instant. He realized that wealth, influence, reputation, all of it meant nothing if he allowed this child to continue believing she needed to shrink to survive. The case supervisor gently explained that Lily would likely need temporary placement while they investigated. Daniel listened, but his focus never left her face. He heard his own voice interrupt, calm yet unwavering. He stated that he was prepared to cooperate fully and that if allowed under legal process, he was willing to be considered as a temporary guardian. The room shifted subtly at that declaration. This was no longer accidental involvement. It was commitment. Lily's hand found his again, not tentative this time, but certain. The room grew still after Daniel's declaration, as though the air itself needed a moment to adjust. The case supervisor studied him carefully, measuring sincerity against impulse. She explained the process in clear terms: background checks, home evaluation, court authorization. Nothing could be immediate, but his willingness would be documented. Daniel nodded without hesitation. He had navigated regulatory systems his entire career. This would be no different, except that the stakes felt infinitely more personal. Lily remained beside him, her hand wrapped firmly around his fingers, no longer testing his presence but claiming it. An officer returned with preliminary information. They had identified Lily's mother and were attempting contact. There was no confirmation yet, only an address and unanswered calls. The uncertainty hovered like a shadow. Daniel listened closely, understanding that resolution would not arrive in a single evening. He asked what would happen to Lily tonight. The supervisor explained that if no immediate family member could be reached, she would be placed in temporary foster care while the investigation continued. The word foster carried a clinical weight that did not fit the small girl in his coat. Daniel inhaled slowly and spoke again, his voice steady but resolute. He reiterated his request to be considered as an emergency placement option. He provided additional references without being prompted: names of respected community leaders, proof of residence, full transparency. This was not a grand gesture. It was logistics in service of something fragile. Lily looked up at him when the adults paused to confer. She did not speak, but her eyes asked the same silent question they had asked all evening. "Are you staying?" Daniel squeezed her hand gently and answered with his expression alone. After several tense minutes, the supervisor returned with cautious approval. Pending immediate checks that could be completed within hours, Lily could remain under his supervision overnight, provided he complied with monitoring guidelines. The relief that washed over him was not dramatic. It was grounding. He had not realized how deeply he feared the alternative until that moment. Paperwork followed: signatures, instructions, contact numbers. When they finally stepped outside into the cool Ohio night, Lily's hand still in his, Daniel felt the magnitude of what had begun. The landfill felt like a lifetime ago. The city lights stretched ahead, and for the first time in years, his path forward was not about expansion or acquisition. It was about shelter. The drive to Daniel's home felt different from the one that had left the landfill hours earlier. The city lights of Columbus shimmered against the windshield, and traffic had thinned to a steady, quiet flow. Lily sat in the passenger seat, once again, this time buckled securely, her small hands resting on the edge of the oversized coat. She watched the passing buildings with cautious curiosity, as though trying to understand the scale of the world beyond the suitcase that had contained her. Daniel kept his movements deliberate and calm, adjusting the temperature slightly warmer when he noticed her shoulders relax. He explained softly that they were going to his house for the night, that a social worker would check in, and that everything happening was meant to keep her safe. She listened without interrupting, absorbing each word carefully. When they turned into his gated driveway, the iron bars parted automatically, revealing a long stretch of stone path, illuminated by ground lights spaced every 10 feet. The house rose ahead, modern and expansive windows glowing against the dark sky. Lily's eyes widened slightly, not in awe but in uncertainty. Daniel understood that size did not equal comfort. He parked in the circular drive and walked around to open her door, offering his hand as he had before. Inside, the foyer ceiling soared nearly 20 feet high, the marble floors reflecting soft chandelier light. The space, once a symbol of his success, now felt too vast, too echoing. He guided Lily through the hallway, slowly explaining each room in simple terms, so nothing would feel like a surprise. He selected a guest bedroom on the first floor, smaller and warmer than the others, with a window overlooking the backyard garden. He turned on a bedside lamp instead of the overhead light to soften the room. Lily stepped inside carefully, as if testing whether the floor would shift beneath her. Daniel knelt to her level and told her she could choose where to sit, that nothing here required her to fold herself small. The words hung gently in the space between them. For the first time that night, Lily walked toward the center of the room instead of the corner. Daniel stepped back to give Lily space as she explored the room in small, deliberate steps. The guest bedroom had been designed for visiting executives, not children, yet the soft beige walls and woven rug beneath her sneakers created a quiet warmth. She reached out and touched the edge of the dresser, then the curtain, as though confirming they were solid and real. Daniel moved to the closet and found a set of fresh towels and a spare cotton t-shirt he rarely wore. He explained gently that she could take a warm shower if she wanted, that he would remain just outside the door. Lily hesitated only a moment before nodding. While the water ran, Daniel stood in the hallway, leaning one shoulder against the wall, staring at the framed photographs that lined it. Awards, groundbreakings, magazine covers, achievements that once defined him. None of them felt relevant now. After several minutes, the bathroom door opened quietly. Lily stepped out wearing the oversized t-shirt that fell nearly to her knees, her damp hair combed back with careful effort. She looked smaller without the coat, but steadier. Daniel showed her how to adjust the bedside lamp and where the light switches were, explaining each detail so nothing would feel uncertain in the night. He brought her a simple meal from the kitchen, toast with peanut butter and a glass of milk, placing it on the nightstand without ceremony. She ate slowly, as though relearning hunger. When she finished, she climbed onto the bed, testing the mattress with cautious pressure before settling beneath the blanket. Daniel pulled a chair closer and sat beside her, not looming, just present. He told her a simple story about building a treehouse when he was 8 years old, about how it leaned to one side, but still felt like the safest place in the world because he had built it himself. Lily listened with half-closed eyes. Before sleep claimed her, she asked if she would have to leave in the morning. Daniel answered honestly. He said there would be conversations and decisions, but that tonight she was safe here. Her breathing slowed, gradually evening out into a steady rhythm. Daniel remained seated long after she drifted off, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Understanding that for the first time in years, he did not feel alone in his own house. Morning light filtered softly through the garden window, casting pale gold across the bedroom walls. Daniel had not intended to fall asleep in the chair yet. Sometime before dawn, exhaustion claimed him. He woke to the faint sound of movement and found Lily sitting upright in the bed, watching the sunlight with quiet concentration. For a split second, he forgot where he was. Then the memory returned in full. He straightened slowly so he would not startle her and offered a small smile. She studied him as though confirming he had not disappeared overnight. When he asked how she slept, she answered that it was quiet. The word carried more meaning than it should have. Daniel stood and opened the curtains a little wider, letting the morning settle gently into the room rather than flood it. He told her breakfast could be anything she liked. She thought for a moment and chose pancakes. In the kitchen, he moved with unfamiliar awkwardness, measuring batter and adjusting the stove with more focus than he had ever given a board meeting. Lily sat at the island counter, feet not quite touching the floor, watching him flip each pancake carefully. When he placed the plate in front of her, she looked down at it as though it were something rare. She took one bite, then another, slower this time, savoring rather than conserving. The house felt different with her there, less echoing, less hollow. As the morning continued, Daniel's phone vibrated with updates from social services and investigators. but for the first time in years, he did not reach for it immediately. Instead, he poured a second glass of milk and asked Lily if she preferred blueberries on top next time. She nodded, a faint smile forming small but unmistakable. By late morning, the formal calls began. A case supervisor confirmed that Lily's mother had been located and was safe but overwhelmed, and that a full assessment would take time. There were no immediate plans to reunite them until stability could be ensured. Daniel listened carefully, asking precise questions about next steps, timelines, and what Lily would need emotionally in the coming days. When he ended the call, he did not immediately relay every detail. Instead, he joined Lily in the backyard garden, where she stood studying a row of white roses. The property stretched nearly 2 acres, manicured and symmetrical, yet she seemed most interested in a single butterfly hovering near the fence. Daniel explained gently that many adults were working to make sure everyone involved was safe and supported. He did not assign blame. He did not simplify complexity. He told her that sometimes families needed help before they could stand steady again. Lily absorbed this quietly, then asked if she had done something wrong. The question was softer now, less desperate, but still searching. Daniel knelt beside her in the grass and answered without hesitation. He said she had done nothing wrong. He said adults are responsible for building safe spaces, and when those spaces break, it is never because a child is too much. The breeze moved lightly through the trees, carrying the scent of cut grass and early autumn. Lily considered his words, then stepped closer to him, leaning her shoulder briefly against his arm. It was a small gesture, almost casual, yet it carried trust. Daniel looked across the yard at the house that once symbolized success alone, and understood it was becoming something else. Not an empire, not a monument. A place where someone did not have to fold themselves small. That evening, after phone calls and careful explanations, after paperwork and quiet reassurances, Daniel drove back toward the edge of the city alone. Lily was at home with a licensed social worker conducting a routine visit, and the house felt temporarily still again. He followed the familiar 2-lane road until the faint outline of the landfill appeared against the darkening sky. He did not enter. He simply parked along the shoulder where the gravel met the pavement and stepped out. The air smelled the same as it had the day before, a mix of metal and earth, yet everything inside him had shifted. He stood there for a long moment, hands in his coat pockets, replaying the exact second he almost drove away. The hesitation, the calculation, the part of him that believed involvement was optional. Headlights passed behind him, occasionally unaware of what had changed here less than 24 hours earlier. Daniel understood now that wealth had given him choices, but compassion required decisions. A year from now, the investigation would have concluded, arrangements would have evolved, and life would look different than either of them imagined. But the turning point would always trace back to this place. He looked toward the distant piles of discarded things and felt no anger, only clarity. Some people are thrown away by circumstances beyond their control. Some are folded into corners by storms they did not create. He inhaled deeply, then returned to his vehicle. As he drove back toward the lights of his home, he knew one thing with certainty. The suitcase had not just been moving, so had he. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.